Hey podcasters, before we start the show today, we wanted to share some news. On January 22nd, ATA sent a second letter to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, urging the CDC to explicitly include on-site medical interpreters and interpreters in other settings, such as the courts, among the listed examples of frontline essential workers eligible for Phase 1 vaccinations. We have been getting some great feedback from members that the letter is already having an effect. Several members have reported being immediately included in Phase 1 vaccinations when they contacted their local health departments. If you're an ATA member, please review the January 28th email from ATA headquarters to find out what you can do to help ATA stand up and speak out on this issue. Let's do what we can to help increase awareness for our colleagues and their essential role in combating the crisis. For more information, please contact ATA's Advocacy Committee by sending an email to advocacy@atanet.org. All right, now let's start the show. Welcome to the ATA podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to episode 52. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. ATA was founded over 60 years ago to advance the translation and interpreting professions and foster the professional development of individual translators and interpreters. We have over 10,000 members in more than 100 countries. Members include translators, interpreters, teachers, project managers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Both individuals and organizations can join the association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, be sure to check out our past episodes or visit atanet.org. Today we're going to look back at the year 2020. I know I'd rather forget it myself and look ahead, but it was an unprecedented year. A challenging year for us all and for our association. So let's talk about what happened, how ATA responded, and what we've learned. We end today's podcast with a look ahead to a long list of items on the agenda in 2021 and beyond. This is your chance to get a roundup of what your association has been doing for you these past 12 months or so, all in about 60 minutes. So stay with us.
Hey there, translators and interpreters. Listen up. Did you catch all the promotional videos ATA released in January? There are 6, and you can find them on ATA's YouTube channel and social media platforms. What's in these videos, you ask? They're all about member benefits. We asked members to tell us about the benefits of membership, and guess what? They had a lot to say. Now we need you to help us spread the word. Let's make sure everyone knows how ATA can help them advance their careers, grow their client reach, save money, and more. Also, now that the second draw on the Payroll Protection Program, or PPP, has rolled out in the United States, it's a good time to review all the options available from the federal government. ATA member Robin Bonthorn has done just that in an article in the ATA Chronicle that is packed with info you don't want to miss. And there's more. Robin's article is just a preview of ATA's new advanced T&I business blog, which will be launching soon. Keep an eye out. On February 24th, ATA is hosting back-to-back audiovisual webinars. Join to learn more about the rapidly growing specialization of subtitling, as well as closed captioning and subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. Save $15 if you register for both. Remember, log in to get your member discount. Even if you can't attend on the 24th, you can still register. You'll receive a link to the on-demand recording after the event. Don't wait, register today. And finally, ATA is so proud to announce the launch of our new website. The site is still packed with helpful resources and is now much easier to navigate with a sleek, beautiful, and contemporary design. Best of all, it shines the spotlight on ATA members with a clear message to potential clients who land on our page. If you care about your customers, want to take your message to the next level, and are committed to quality, then the language professional you need is an ATA member. For information on each of these announcements and more, look for the links in this episode's notes.
All right, we're back. Joining me now are Ted Wozniak and Marilena Sanchez-Sampaulo. Ted is the current president of the American Translators Association. He is a full-time ATA-certified German to English translator specializing in finance and accounting. Ted has previously served as an ATA director, treasurer, and chair of the Ethics Committee and the Advocacy Committee. Madalena is currently serving as ATA President-elect, ATA 62 Conference Organizer, and chair of the association's Governance and Communications Committee. She is an ATA certified translator and owner of Accessible Translation Solutions, a boutique translation agency based in Southern California. She is also a consultant for the University of Louisville Graduate Certificate in Translation. Ted and Madalena, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be back.
Thanks, Matt.
It's really great to be talking with both of you again. You know, the last time you were on the pod was back in August. A lot has happened since then, so you might not remember. That was our 2020 halftime show, and you know, we certainly had a lot to talk about back then. And today is going to be no different, because I think we all know 2020 was quite the eventful year, to say the least. But we're not going to recap everything today. We talked about that offline, and I'd like to focus a little more on the second half of the year and going forward into 2020. And I can tell anyone listening right now, if you are interested in more details about the first half of 2020, then please go back and listen to that halftime show, which was episode 46. You're going to get all the details that we will just, briefly cover today. But the year did kind of start out with a bang toward the year 2020. So I want to mention, obviously, California Assembly Bill 5 that went into force on January 1st, and just a few months later, the COVID hit and we had a global pandemic on our hands. And COVID, of course, had a huge impact on our lives and on the livelihoods of many translators and interpreters. So I'd like to start there today. And can you please, let's start with you, Ted. Please give us sort of an idea of how ATA responded to the pandemic in the early months.
Sure, Matt. Thank you. Well, obviously, the first thing we did was try to get information out to, particularly for our interpreter colleagues who were suddenly faced with, working conditions and how they could, practice safely where they were still doing in-person translating, particularly medical interpreters, but also legal interpreters. So we had IPAC worked with several other associations and put together the best practices info sheet for using interpreters. And just recently, later development, now that we're in the vaccination stage, we sent out a letter to the CDC, which was co-signed by like 20, I think, other T&I associations or interpreters and medical providers about getting in-person interpreters up in that top tier for vaccinations. Obviously, there was a lot to do, again, particularly with interpreters. Obviously, translators, we get to work in isolation anyway, so our lives didn't change that much there. But on the larger level for ATA, we obviously had to switch to virtual board meetings. That took some changes. Again, a lot of what we did was just, getting information out and trying to, keep up with information, keep up with things, and just keeping our members up to date. On the financial side, for our members, one thing the board decided to do to make things somewhat a little bit easier for those of us who have been impacted financially was to institute a installment plan option for members who want to renew or new members, so that now we're in renewal season. When you go to fill out your form, you do have an option of using an installment plan. So take a little bit of the pain away of paying your dues this year.
And then also we ended up obviously planning for a virtual conference. As the year went on, we realized it became more clear that we were not going to be able to meet in person in Boston, as sad as that was, and we decided to move to a fully virtual conference. So the board approved that change, and we immediately shifted all of our planning to accommodate that new model for us. Also, the webinar program really ramped up this past year because clearly everybody was doing their learning online in 2020. So the professional development team really took that on, and I think they've created a very robust program, and they're working on ways to make it, sustainable going forward as well. So I'm really happy with how that is going. And of course, school outreach, which is part of the PR program, that team as well, they shifted immediately and they started offering um, presentations for how to do your school outreach online, basically for classes that were also moving to that online model. Basically students everywhere were having to learn from home. And so we said, well, if we're going to do our school outreach presentations, we need to make it feasible for those teachers and students and take it virtual. So they really offered a lot to members who were looking to take part in the school outreach program and contest in 2020.
Right on. Thank you. I'm going to ask you in a moment, Madalena, more about the virtual conference and the webinar program.
Mhm.
But Ted, regarding the CARES Act, real quickly before we move on, and I want to note here that in episode 43, we did a special edition of the podcast on the CARES Act and specific responses to COVID at the time. But I know at the time, some COVID-19 best practices were put out by ATA, specifically by ATA's Interpretation Advisory Policy Committee. Can you just tell us briefly what that was about?
Sure, Matt. When we looked into the impact of the pandemic and on our members, we saw that many of our members, again, particularly interpreters, are essential workers who are exposed to COVID-19 while they're providing access to vital services, healthcare, but also legal and also in school settings, educational interpreting. So we just say, we needed to provide guidance to the hiring entities who were using, in-person interpreters about, how to provide safe working conditions for those interpreters. So the IPAC, the Interpretation Advisory Policy Committee, again, worked with other T&I organizations to develop that handout on safe working conditions, following the guidelines that were published by the Centers for Disease Control and as well as OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health. And so we got that letter again. So for our members to take and use and to give to the agencies or the courts or whatever setting they're working in, the people that were in charge of that admin part, to educate them on how to allow them to continue to provide their services safely during the pandemic. We did a video earlier in the year that actually showed, interpreters working on, the front lines during the pandemic as part of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that video. I wanted to throw that out there for our listeners to check out YouTube. That was a really great video that I think we can still spread today, and it's still super relevant to remind a lot of people that I think it's not, interpreters, when you think of a medical situation, I think the general public doesn't necessarily think of interpreters first and foremost. I think that's something, and I would encourage all listeners to go check it out on ATA's YouTube channel and share it on all your social media, because it's a really great video that shows and reminds everybody the importance of interpreters on the front lines during this pandemic.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Madalena, I'd like to turn now to the webinar program that you just mentioned. And as you said, as we all know, I should say, everything went virtual in 2020. The conference and workshops that many of us freelance translators and interpreters attend every year for professional development, a lot of these things were canceled. And, but I think some just were canceled completely. Some went online, but the number of options just, I think, was definitely at the beginning was limited. I think that's changed now 10, 12 months later. But you mentioned that the ATA has been trying to fill this need by expanding the webinar program. Can you provide a little more detail about that?
Yeah, so obviously, like you said, 2020 was a year where everything went virtual. And I do think there was a small period of time, right, when everything shifted, where people were starting to say, okay, well, I can't go to this in person. Things were getting canceled left and right. And that's when organizations were really picking up and saying, okay, well, we need to serve those members and people who need these continuing education credits and who want to continue learning, and so ATA did that as well. So the Professional Development Committee rolled out a few new things this past year, including the Back to Business Basics series, which is a new series that they're about 45 minutes long, these webinars. And I believe the first set was considered a pilot. Both Corinne McKay and I presented these, and I think there were about 6 to 8 of them. I think it was about 6 of them. And we were the first speakers just to kind of see how it would go. And it was very popular. So they are wrapping up the first series now. I think there's one more in the series at the time we're recording this that Corinne's going to give. And then they're now working on the next set of Back to Business Basics webinars. And all of these are free to our members. So we've heard really good feedback on these, that they're very helpful, and they're giving, translators and interpreters new ideas for their business. So even though it's called Back to Business Basics, I think we have people who have been working in the professions for a long time who are still taking part in these. And then we continue to have webinars on demand. Every time we give a webinar online or any kind of a virtual learning offering, we put that into our library of webinars, which is available to members as well. And that includes those Back to Basics webinars and previous webinars that ATA has put on. And I don't know that it was in 2020. I think this might have started in 2019, but I know that it really picked up for people in 2020 was the free monthly webinars for members. So ATA members get a free webinar each month. So you can find out more about which webinar is free by looking at ATA's website under professional development or checking your news briefs, because we announce those every month. And it's just been a very good benefit for our members, and for, members get the webinars either for free or at a lower member cost than if they weren't members. So the non-member price is obviously higher.
Right on. Thank you. Now, moving on, Madalena, to ATA 61, which you also mentioned earlier, which, of course, most of our listeners might know. It's ATA's flagship event, the annual conference. And me and you sat down back in the fall and talked about this first ever virtual conference. We previewed it. That's episode 47. And, it is a huge event. It attracts some 1,500 people every year and more. Typically, we offer 170 sessions over 3 days, and then we have advanced training day the day before the conference. That's like another 15 to 20 3-hour workshops. So it's a huge challenge as an on-site event. But I understand moving it to a virtual was something totally new, and was definitely, as we talked about in episode 47, a big challenge. So when we talked in August, there were still a lot of unknowns, of course. So now, with the benefit of hindsight, tell us, how did ATA 61 go?
Yeah, it was, in my mind, as successful as I would have hoped it would have been, because this was something we never have done before. We know how to put on an on-site event, and so this was a completely different model for us. But we, as soon as we shifted to make sure that it was going to be completely virtual, everything was focused on how to make it as great of an event as possible. And so I think we ended up with just over 1,500 attendees for the virtual conference from close to 50 countries, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow. 50 countries.
Yeah, I think it was like
Awesome.
47 or something like that. But it turned out, obviously this was more accessible to more people. We expect big numbers in the bigger cities like Boston, but obviously we had to hit the brakes on that. And so we were able to keep a large number of educational sessions. I think in the end, we ended up with 120 educational sessions over the 3 days of the conference. We still had several networking events each night. There were at least 2. We had our Buddies Welcome Newbies as usual. And a lot of the things that we typically do in person, we shifted to an online format, and it worked quite well in the end. So yeah, I would say that in that sense, we now have a model we can work from. And we were very lucky, I have to say. We were lucky in the fact that our conference was not in the spring, right? When a lot of the conferences that were in the spring just had to completely cancel.
Yeah.
So we had the benefit of a little bit more time to plan. So yeah, as of right now, we don't have the final numbers on how everything's turning out, but I think we're close to a break even mark, which I think is still a successful thing to note, considering that we've never done this before. But like I said, since it was our first time, not knowing what to expect in terms of attendance, I think we did pretty well.
Nice. And, I attended. So, on a personal note, I was really impressed with what you guys, put on in a totally new format for ATA. And I really enjoyed it, even attending from Germany, where I had to sometimes attend some of the sessions late into the night. But they're all available on demand, which is really cool. So I've been able to go back and catch up on some of the ones I wasn't able to stay up for, or just even, 2 sessions. Every year I go to the conference, there's 2 sessions at the same time that you can't be in 2 places at once. And I thought, well, this year, hilarious, you can actually be in 2 places at once. You can just go and watch the one you missed on demand. And I also moderated the speed networking event, and I have to say, I was skeptical about how that was going to work. In Zoom and with breakout rooms, and we had 100 people show up, and it really went great. I got a lot of great feedback. You could just tell, and that people were really hungry for socializing. And one of some of the most fun I had during those 3 days was the virtual lounge that was set up, that it was just an open Zoom room, and you could just pop in anytime you wanted and see who was there. There was, I think the 3 or 4 times that I went there was at least 40 people in the room having a conversation about something, and you could just listen in. Ted, I know Ted, you went into the lounge, and people were you fielded questions, which I thought was really cool, as president, to go there and sort of make yourself accessible. So it really created an opportunity for us all to get together. And I was really surprised. I think I went in very skeptical, and that was good, because in the end, I was pleasantly surprised with how it went.
We heard that from a lot of people, that they weren't sure what to expect, and they were very pleasantly surprised. Even people who at first said, "There's no way I'm going to a virtual conference," and they ended up attending, and they really liked it. And to your point, Matt, about the time zones, that was a huge challenge for us. So I take my hat off to Adriana Lechna, who runs our programs, professional development programs through ATA, because she really tried to schedule all the speakers at a time that would work as well as possible for the time zone they were in.
I think it was great. Like I said, if the later sessions in the day were pretty late for me, but the advantage, and I have to throw out to listeners, it's still out there. And even if you were unable to attend, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can still go purchase the conference and get all those sessions on demand.
Yes, it's going to be available for purchase with the new website. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay. That's coming up. Great. Good.
I could jump in there, Matt. I want to reiterate what, again, as far as the attendees goes, certainly there's no question that it was a good success, big success, especially considering our first one. We've never done it before, and shifting gears in the middle. So again, for those of you or anyone listening who didn't attend, those sessions, access to that will go on sale pretty soon. And so you can visit you can sit at every one of those sessions that you might want to see. We do have to say, though, again, when we're looking forward, recapping, we have not yet had our hits and misses meeting, which is something we do after every conference. We sit down with Adrian, our meeting planner, who Madalena mentioned, the conference organizer, president-elect, the executive director, and some other people. We have, our audiovisual folks, their representative, and some other folks. We all sit down and we go through, what happened, what went right, what went wrong, because every conference has its own challenges and its own hits and misses. We have yet to do that, so we haven't had our formal meeting on that. But we did get feedback, so for our exhibitors and our sponsors, it was not such a great success for them. We're going to have to, figure out how to tweak that if we're going to do something like this in the future to make it better for them. Yeah, because they do, they provide a fair amount of money to underwrite the cost, and it was not a financial success. Our preliminary numbers are in. and we're at break even now, but we haven't even cleared the rest of the overhead. So we're definitely going to take a loss on it, which I'm going to talk about later when looking forward. But it's going to be a challenge, on how we take the lessons we learned there, and there's definitely some positive things that we can use going forward and apply that to the next one. So it was a great experience for us, and I'm glad we were able to do it, and I'm glad it was a success for the attendees.
Well, from what I understand, the next conference, the ATA 62, which is scheduled to be held in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I really hope it ends up happening because I'm originally from Minnesota, and so that's gonna be like going home. And but I do understand that we're at the moment it's being planned as a hybrid conference, correct?
Right. That's right. So this year with the hybrid conference, which for anybody listening that's not sure about what that term means, it means that we plan to still be there in person, circumstances permitting, obviously, and also hold a virtual component of the conference. I don't think that's going to change in the years to come. I think we will be looking at hybrid models for the coming years, especially with so much being available to people online these days. And now that we have held a virtual conference, we, like Ted said, we know more or less, what to expect. And even though each conference is different, we do sit down and look at what went well and what we can improve upon. So we're going to do that. And the call for proposals is open now. It closes on March 1st. So if you're going to propose a session for this year, go ahead and get your proposals in. The divisions have also nominated their distinguished speakers for this year, and those that were accepted are also proposing their sessions at this time. Since we're planning to meet in person for the in-person component, we know that even though we'll have a smaller crowd in person than normally, there are some good things for that as well. For some people, they really do like to meet in person in general, and there are a lot of people who just can't wait to get back together, and it will have a cozier feel to it, which if you've been to a smaller ATA conference in the past, you kind of know how that is, and it is a nice thing to enjoy. And we will be streaming and recording the presentations that are given in person this year. So you can expect that if you're watching online and the presentations are taking place in person, they're happening at the conference in Minneapolis. And we will hold the division governance meetings online again this year. We did that in 2020 when everything moved online. And we heard from a lot of divisions that they really liked the online format. More people were able to attend the meetings in general. And we'll tweak some things this year to make it a little easier for the divisions to schedule those meetings. But we wanted to give them enough time to start planning now. And this is a good thing for the conference as well, because it now opens up more time slots for educational sessions in the schedule.
Okay, sounds like you guys have your work cut out for you.
Always.
Yes, yes. Now, I think it's safe to say, Ted, that the last 10, 11 months have been a learning experience.
That's a polite way of saying it.
What do you think the pandemic has taught us as an association?
On a larger mega level, a few things. I've often when I've talked to people about they come up with ideas, or they want ATA to do something new. I often tell them, ATA is like this massive oil super tanker, and if you want to change direction, the ship's going to go about 400 miles as you're changing course. Although we were confronted with COVID, and in at least a lot of respects, maybe not so much with the conference, but with a lot of other things, PD. I did learn that ATA is resilient, and they can move with what was for them abnormally rapid speed. So we did get a lot of things moving and changed relatively quickly. And along with that, we were forced to certainly ramp up if they were, were things that were already in the works, and expand, all of our digital activities from, again, from, as been mentioned, professional development, webinars, but also meetings, the board meetings, and just, learning to adapt to this hopefully once in a lifetime weird, situation we're in where we were, had to be separate and couldn't be in person. Um, so that's one thing that, I think, that's taught ATA. Um, it's, also, how to do it. It's also us that we can do things. We when we're confronted with an unexpected uh, major event, we can cope. I think it's also had a good, some positive side effects for us. Obviously, this people getting used to electronic meetings, as Marlena just mentioned, with division governance sessions. Whether that continues when things get back to normal remains to be seen. Um, but if it does, in one form or another, those are extra sessions that we can add to the conference. And committee work, a lot of the committees have, really ramped up meeting virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made them more efficient. It's made them, they producing more. I'm going to talk about it later, but our committees, all the committees have been cranking out the work in this last year.
Yeah.
So, sad as it was, we had to live through it. It has had some positive side effects.
Right on. Well, speaking, I think of that and all the work that the committees and stuff, I would like to talk about something that totally new that happened in 2020. So it wasn't entirely about COVID and AB5, but in 2020, ATA introduced 6 new awards this year. And Madalena, can you tell us what are the new awards and why did ATA introduce them?
Yes, definitely. So the Honors and Awards Committee came together and decided to propose some new awards, and they proposed that to the board, and the board said, yes, this is a great idea. We really see, the Honors and Awards as a wonderful thing that ATA has every year. And we usually, of course, we give the honors at the conference, at the awards at the conference. And so they worked on that this past year, and they came up with 6 new awards, all of them being awarded in this first year, but going forward, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they will award 3 every year and so it's on a rotational basis.
Mhm.
And so the new awards this past year were for advocacy, the Dynamo Award, the Impact Award, Innovation, Mentoring, and the Rising Star Award. And if you want to see who won those awards, if you didn't make it to the conference, then you can find that in the November-December issue, 2020 issue of the Chronicle.
Right on. And actually, I attended the award ceremony at the virtual conference, and that was so well done. It was kind of
Yeah.
like watching the virtual Oscars.
Yes, it was
Um,
really fun.
Yeah,
and I think it's really
big shout out to Karen and Tachik and Caitlin Walsh there on putting that together. Again, also virtually, never done before. They really made it work.
They did, and people were really excited about it and pleasantly surprised. I think nobody was expecting that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I it definitely put a smile on my face, and it's really nice to see ATA members. I mean, this was a volunteer member driven development and initiative to honor more of ATA's volunteers. Now, International Translation Day is something's always a highlight on Translators calendar, the September 30th every year. And so definitely was a highlight. And I think I'd like to talk about it because I think after the great campaign that was in 2019, which I encourage listeners to go back and check out YouTube for that, I was pretty impressed with this year's campaign as well. So what did the Public Relations Committee put together this year?
Thanks. Yeah. So I agree. I think each year it gets better. I remember when we started doing these campaigns, I think it was maybe 2017 or 18 when I was the Public Relations Committee chair. And the first thing we did was those infographics that are still being widely shared. And then they turned it into a motion graphic. And now they've come up with videos as well. So this past year in 2020, they created a really great video that explains how language professionals play a role in the development of something that we all use every day, which is your smartphone. And so it was a really fun look behind the scenes for the public, but also for the rest of us too, that we like to share about what we do. And this was a really I think tangible way to see what translators and interpreters do and the role we play in the world. Through these videos that they create now seems every year, but this one last year was, I think, a really fun way to share that with the public, so that sort of like everybody can understand this concept. It affects them in some way because most people use a smartphone. And so you can find it on ATA's YouTube channel, or you can find it by searching for hashtag International Translation Day or hashtag ATA ITD 2020 on all of ATA's social media platforms. And we continue to encourage our members to share it, and especially with people who don't know much about what we do. It's a short video. I think it's like less than 2 minutes long. And all of this through, the Public Relations Committee is part of ATA's efforts to increase awareness about our professions.
Yeah, I think it's a timeless piece. It certainly can
Mhm.
be, if you're looking for some content for your social media, it's definitely one that I encourage everybody as well to share with, especially people outside the T&I industry. Well, ITD 2020 was special for another reason, and with regard to this podcast, and that was because it was the day we released the 50th episode. And I was really, really stoked that we made that work. I really wanted to reach that milestone, that 50th podcast on such a special day for translators. So I don't want to toot my own horn, but it was a fun moment for me as well. And for ATA.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks to you for keeping this podcast going that long, Matt. I mean, 50 episodes is a big milestone.
Yeah. Toot away, Matt.
Thank you. Well, if anybody listened to that episode, I interviewed Nick Hartman, who is a past ATA president. He's also honorary member of ATA, and he has been a member for 35 years and been active from almost the very beginning. And interviewing him, I just felt was the perfect way to cover 35 years of ATA and translation industry history. And it was a really fascinating discussion. And if you missed it, I encourage everybody to go back and listen to it. It was a really fun and fascinating look back at translation, in the 80s and how different it is to now.
Yeah, it was really nice to hear Nick talk about how he started and how he used to deliver his translations and how his career has shifted and how ATA has shifted. I think that was really interesting to hear, about how things used to be and then think about how they are now. It was a very entertaining episode.
And overall, in 2020, I say we had a really good lineup last year. After talking about very, very timely issues like AB5 and COVID, we also did our first collaboration with the Troublesome Terps podcast, which is a very popular podcast for interpreters. And which the Terps actually turned into a live broadcast. That was all their idea, and it turned out to be a great, an awesome show. And it's our the longest record podcast. It was an hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
But they had I think 100 people showed up and live to take part in the event, and people asked questions. And we had we had Melinda Gonzalez Hibner and Elena Langdon on to represent ATA. And it was just a really cool, these four, the Terps are all here in Europe. And so it was 4 European interpreters talking to 2 US interpreters, and just sort of going back. And, that was in the spring, and COVID and all the conference interpreting had been shut down. And Melinda gave great insight into the court system, and Elena, who's also a medical translator. It was just a really great podcast.
Yeah, well, a lot happened for interpreters in 2020. I mean, there was a huge shift for them, and it's continuing, I think, into 2021.
And I have to say, one of my favorite podcasts of this year was episode 45 in July. And Ted, I know you remember this one. That was the one we did about government division and government linguist outreach task force.
Yep.
And it was just so cool to talk to Joe Mazza and Rusty Shugart. What they are doing to connect with government linguists, the outreach that they're doing to ensure that government linguists know about ATA, and if they're leaving service, the benefits of ATA membership and how they could use their skills in the private sector.
Yeah, sure, man. I mean, that was definitely a great podcast. I mean, anytime you get Joe Mosley in front of an audience, he's always a great speaker, very entertaining. Um, I've been to several of his presentations at the conference, and he's just a great speaker, period. And I can't say enough about Rusty Sugar and the enthusiasm and, my God, the amount of work that this guy has done on the Government Linguist Outreach Task Force, and trying to, again, this is kind of my baby, being a former military linguist, trying to get the word out about ATA and about, the opportunities to be a translator or an interpreter once they leave the service. So hats off to both of them. Really great.
Yeah, definitely.
Right on. Now, okay, one last thing that stands out to me, and then we'll move on, and we don't have to talk about the podcast anymore. But my conversation with Jay Marciano in September, that was episode 49, and it was kind of the prequel to the ATA conference, because he was a speaker, and it really it was supposed to be just about his session and talk a little bit about post editing, and it turned him into this fascinating conversation about the future of post editing and machine translation. And he's I think one of the industry's top experts in the field, and so I really enjoyed that conversation. And I loved, my favorite quote from the whole episode is when Jay said, "We can't lose the human aspect of translation." And I just love that coming from a tech guy, a guy who's on the machine translation side of things. It was great to hear, him emphasizing the human aspect of translation. So if you haven't listened to that one, there's another plug. Please go back and listen to it. So it was a really great conversation. So, all right, let's move on. I'd like to talk about something else that changed in 2020, and that was the continuing education requirements. Some changes were made. They were revised in 2020. If they came into effect actually way back in January, on January 1st. And Ted, can you tell us how the requirements have changed?
Sure, Matt. Well, first of all, the certification committee, put together a task force, continuation task force, to look at, what our current continuing education requirements were, and look at best practices, what underlies them, and are they doing what they're supposed to do, and do they meet best practices? And so based upon their study, they came up with some changes. And the biggest one, obviously this only affects certified translators. If you are ATA certified, it doesn't apply to the rest of our members. But for all the CTs out there, the biggest change is that going forward, all CTs are going to have to at least report their continuing education credits. They're going to have to get their 20 credits. So except for members who were grandfathered, because there was an exception for CTs over 60, except for those who were grandfathered, which as of 1 January of this year, are those CTs who were born before 1963. All CTs are going to have to report. They're going to have to submit 20 continuing education points every 3 years. And then the next slight change is that also includes CTs who turn 60 this going forward. So as of 1 January, if they turn 60 after 1 January of this year, they're still going to have to report their CE points, but they won't have to pay the fee, the recertification fee, I think now we're changing. It's the certification renewal fee. We're changing the term, I believe. So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. There were some minor tweaks in the classification of different events and the maximum points you can get. Any CT who needs to get the details, that has any confusion about that, there's an article from the immediate past chair of the certification committee, David Stevenson, in the ATA Chronicle about that, and it's got all the details. I suggest you read that, and if you still have questions, you can contact the certification committee. The new chair is Michelle Hansen, and they'll be happy to answer your questions.
Ted, I'd also like to talk to you about ATA's election this year. You know, ATA holds an election every year at the ATA at the annual conference, which was of course virtual this year, but we still had our election as normal. And in addition to electing board positions, in this year's election, there were 2 amendment proposals or proposed amendments to the bylaws, the ATA bylaws on the ballot. Can you tell us what were those about and what was the outcome of the vote?
Sure. Well, there's one amendment that was known, entitled the Rights and Privileges Amendment, more popularly or unpopularly known as the Decoupling Amendment, because that's what it was about. It was about whether taking the ATA certification exam was an exclusive right of membership. The actual amendment was trying to clarify that. And as a result, if it had passed, which it did not, it would have clarified whether or not the ATA Board of Directors had the right to decouple or certification from membership and allow non-members to take the certification exam. It did get a majority of the voters were in favor of it, but because it's a bylaws amendment, it needed a 2/3 majority, so it did fail by, if it was 19 votes, I think, I forget the exact number. The point is, it did fail. It did not garner sufficient support from the voting members to pass. And the other amendment was a member proposal, came up by petition from a member who the amendment has now, which did pass, and with strong numbers, 680 to 158. So there was strong support for this. It now mandates that the Nominating and Leadership Development Committee must nominate at least 2 candidates for every position open for election every year. It's never been a real problem for directors. We normally have 3 director slots that normally open up every year, and the nominating committee normally puts 6 people on that, so that's never been a real issue there. The issue was from the member standpoint, was for the officer positions. Every other year, we have 3 officer positions come up: president-elect, secretary, and treasurer. So now going forward, and including this year, because this is an officer election year, the nominating committee, when they send their nominations to the board to be forwarded on to the members for voting, will have to have at least 2 names for each of those officer positions. And that's the effect of that one.
Ted, I wanted to follow up with you on the first one you just talked about, the rights and privileges, because I did note that the proposed amendment only missed the 2/3 majority. I believe you just mentioned it by 19 votes. And that means, and as you mentioned as well, a majority, and a pretty strong majority, voted in favor. So do you think the board will take up this issue again in the future?
Good point. Good question, Matt. I'm very loath to predict what the board's going to do at the very next meeting that's going to be held, let alone, at some point in the future. Because I've tried to predict that and been wrong before. I don't think the issue is entirely dead. As a supporter of decoupling, I hope that it's not dead. I think it's probably certainly been put to rest, at least for the near term. It's certainly not going to come up this year or next year. But the underlying reasons why we've talked about decoupling, and why the majority of the board and the certification committee and even a majority of the voting members approve of the idea of decoupling, has not gone away, and it won't go away. So I think it will come up again. And I think, looking at that failed by 19 votes, I do think part of the problem, and I'll be honest here, there was some poor communication on the board's part on explaining, what we were trying to do, why we were trying to do it, why it's a good idea. So, if it does come up again, they're just going to have, the proponents are going to have to do a better job of explaining to members why that would happen, and we'll see. I will have to say that the voting members of ATA are, the vast majority of them are the CTs. And so, there is they have an inherent interest in maintaining the status quo. But even they, were convinced that it was a good idea. So I think if you want to also talk about the other one, if you don't mind, we'll see what happens. The nominating committee on multiple candidates. And again, I personally was against that because it makes their job very difficult, and the easy way around getting around it is it makes they can just have a straw candidate who's not going to have a chance to win, which is exactly what Robert Rule says is the prime reason why Robert's Rule says you shouldn't do this. If Robert's Rule says you shouldn't allow multiple, force them to have multiple candidates, but we'll see what happens. But I can see, I could forecast that, and it'll take several election cycles probably, because again, we only do officers every 2 years, but after 3 or 4 election cycles, it's quite possible that the nominating committee is going to come to the board and say, we just can't do this, or we can't do it the right way to be fair to everybody. We like the intent. They might ask, see if we could change the bylaws again. I would not be surprised to see that. Caveat, my personal opinion there, it does not express the opinion of ATA, any of its affiliates, or
Ted's little disclaimer there at the end. That's good. Well, I actually had a conversation specifically on this issue back on the podcast when we did a podcast on the nominating committee and talked about the process. And that was one of the things that was expressed. That was one of the difficulties is finding 2 candidates. That was there's not this pool of people just to stand lining up to volunteer for these positions. And I was against it as well. I'll put that out there. I voted against it, and I was disappointed. And so, Ted, I'm with you on that one. I think this one's going to come back to the board after a few cycles. So we'll have to see. I have to see what happens. It's never a dull moment. I'd like to ask you guys about membership dues, because the end of the year the end of the year is always membership renewal season. People that renew every year, every 3 years. And this year, ATA introduced some new discounts and options. And Ted alluded to one earlier in the podcast. But Madalena, can you tell us what ATA introduced this year?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One that I just recalled was that something else that the board did in 2020 was we voted to forego the membership dues increase that would have taken place in 2021. So, that was a small gesture, but I think it was helpful for members when they were going to renew this year, especially after last year's economic ups and downs. But so one thing that the board approved was a military discount. So there's a 50% military discount on new ATA membership, and this was in an effort to reach more government linguists. It was recommended by ATA's Government Linguist Outreach Task Force, and it's meant to it's actually meant for those in active duty. So the Coast Guard, the Reserves, the National Guard, all of those people are eligible. There's more information, of course, about it on ATA's website, but this task force has done, as Ted said, quite a bit of work. And one of these items that they felt would be helpful to attract new members from the government linguist pool is to offer a discount to new membership. They, of course, have to provide documentation to support their military status. So that is a key component of that. And we've heard that some people have already taken advantage of that discount. So we're happy to welcome those new members. And then, of course, the other thing was what Ted mentioned was the payment plan. This is new for ATA. I don't recall that we've ever had this before. And this was another response to the pandemic and the financial difficulties that so many people had in 2020 and continuing to have into 2021. And that was to help members who've found it difficult to pay dues in full at this time can now take advantage of the installment plan in 2021. So they can pay in two parts, essentially. So one now at the beginning of the year and one in the summer. And that is available to both new members and for renewing members.
So I'd like to use the remainder of the podcast to look ahead. And if we could, Ted, start with the state of the association. 2020 was obviously a tumultuous year. How is ATA doing, and what's the outlook going forward?
Thank you, Matt. Well, to answer how are we doing, we're surviving just like everybody else, and some of the impact is yet to be seen. We're on a financial basis, we're almost certain to take a loss again for our fiscal 2021 year. Again, our fiscal year does not match the calendar year. It runs from June to June. And as our treasurer, John Milan, reported at the last board meeting, the financial figures we have now are the first ones that fully reflect COVID and the impact of the pandemic, which started in March of last year, and has some of the conference results in it. So because we're going to almost certainly have a loss on the conference, that means we're almost certainly going to have a loss for the year. We're also looking at another year of membership decline. We've had slightly declining membership over the last several years. This year, 2021, is probably going to be exacerbated by COVID related. Folks just don't have the money, even with the installment plan. They're just going to say, I just don't have it. So we're looking at, reduced revenues, and costs are not going down commensurate with the reduction in revenues. So we're looking at another year of losses financially. But we are currently still okay, because we've had several years, past years, where we had some nice surpluses. We were able to put money away for just this reason, to get through, because, cycles, economy goes up and down, and ATA's finances go up and down, usually as goes the conference. So we have money stashed away in our investments. And so we're going to be able to use that money. We were just talking about it. We're going to have to take a fair chunk of money out of our investment account this year, put it into our checking account so we can pay the bills, keep our cash flow going to get through the rest of this fiscal year and get us up to the point where we start getting some cash in from conference registration later on this year. So we're okay. We're not great. We're going to survive 2020 and 2021 just like everybody else. But we're going to have to, take a hard look at things going forward. And we certainly can't afford to, you can't operate at a loss forever, year after year. On a far more positive note than just our finances, looking forward into 2021, a lot of things got started in 2020, many of them because of COVID and our reaction to that. Some of them just were going, happening anyway, and they just happened to fall into 2020. But to finish them up this year, I think that the number one thing that folks, that the listeners are going to be happy to hear about is it looks like there's a really good chance that maybe possibly could be we will have remote online certification testing sometime this summer for the first, at least a trial run. The certification committee has made some pretty good progress on that. They are very hopeful that they might be able to offer this again sometime this summer. I don't want to pin them down to a date certain, but that would be a huge thing. So if they can, we can offer the certification exam remotely. So again, folks don't have to go someplace and sit down and physically take the exam, even though it was online, you were doing it on your computer, but now it'll be offered remotely in the comfort of your home. So that's huge. All of our committees, membership committee, professional development, business practices, advocacy, strategy committee, they've all been working overtime. Again, a lot of it in response to the pandemic. Membership committee's got this new member orientation program that's going to start, I think it's probably like this week. They're wrapping up a new ebook on translating and interpreting for the public, as well as for new translators and interpreters. So explaining, about the profession. We've got a revamping of the mentoring program, continuing to look at add new benefits. The Business Practice Committee is starting these quarterly brainstorm networking events, which should be great. They're initiating a mastermind program. So that's a new thing. The Advocacy Committee has a lot of work cut out for it this year. I recently gave up the chair of Advocacy Committee. I turned it over to Lorena Ortiz-Schneider, who a lot of your listeners might know from her efforts in California with AB5. She's also a director, and she got elected to the board last year. And so she's going to be taking her experience from Coptic in California and helping the newly expanded Advocacy Committee work on what the things that are coming up in 2021, which are certainly sons of AB5 legislation in other states. We've already seen a son of AB5 newly introduced or reintroduced in New Jersey. It's almost a word for word copy of AB5, not a single exemption in it. So, we have to keep an eye on every single state to see what happens there with worker classification and independent contractors. And also, again, now at the federal level, now that, we have Democratic control of Congress and the White House, the PRO Act, which was introduced last year and didn't go anywhere, there's a far greater chance of that seeing some movement this year. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. Again, as far as, definition of employee and independent contractors. And also, again, we have to continue as we work our way through the vaccination effort and get on program, have to keep up on that to make sure that our at-risk members are properly treated, properly classified, have, safe environments, continue to have safe environments and access to vaccines. We're looking for a compensation and actually 2 surveys going out this year. The compensation survey, which we normally do every 3 years, got delayed last year. We were supposed to do it last year, but the board decided that it was because of COVID and all and the financial impact, 2020 was going to be an outlier year. So we pushed it off and the optics didn't look good coming out. This would have been like in April and saying, how much money did you make?
In 2019, yeah.
Yeah, so we pushed it off a year. So we're going to get that out this year. It's been ready to go. Mm-hmm. We're going to get that out. And also in respond to member questions, again, about diversity and the composition of ATA, who are ATA members. We're going to be doing a membership survey that will include a lot of demographic questions in addition to our normal, what's the best benefits? What do you get? What don't you, So, and we'll probably be making that also, put that on a 3-year cycle. So we can get information about who our members are and give us some better information, so give us some hard data on who they are and then figure out how we can better serve them. 2 new big things coming up. I know it's a lot, but I've been pushing the board. We have 2 brand new ad hoc committees that are doing some exploratory work and will be reporting to the board. One is on establishing a national registry of translators and interpreters. This is in response to AB5 and what happened there. And this is purely for worker classification purposes. Anyway, the committee will be reporting, looking, is it feasible and how might we do it? The board will decide. There's also another ad hoc committee, task force, what do you want to call it, that's going to look into the feasibility and make a recommendation on establishing a basic credential that would be, a basic credential, particularly for those language pairs where we don't have an ATA certification test. And we'll see what that one comes up. And the last thing I can think of is we're starting a discussion. I certainly don't think it will wrap up in 2021, but we'll get the discussion going. This is the super tanker model working now on establishing communities of interest or special interest groups or something along those lines as an adjunct to, an alternative to our division structure, but something smaller. And again, to give folks a place, to give them a community for things that divisions aren't set up to do. Maybe, a Trados users group, for just a quick example off the top of my head. So we're looking at that. So all the committees got a lot of work going on, and they'll be pushing this forward, and hopefully we'll get some of these things done before the year is out. Certainly I know some of these things will get done before I leave office.
Yeah,
Adelina, can you think of something else?
Yes, I know there's a lot. I actually did think of something as you were talking, and that is another ad hoc committee, which was the ad hoc website committee. We're wrapping up our work on that committee, hopefully now. Definitely that's something that we're all very excited about, is the new website. And following that will be the association management software that has something that the staff has continued to work on for many months. So all of these things are positive for ATA, and will really we'll see some differences in how things are found on the website, and also how easy it is to access different things.
Wow, what did I say a few minutes ago? Never a dull moment. I
There is
mean,
never a dull moment, Matt.
man, oh man, oh man, you guys, there is just a lot of moving parts right now. I mean, that ship has got a lot of levels, a lot of moving parts, a lot of cranks turning. It's really great to hear. It's always fun to hear what's coming, which way we're navigating and what things are on the horizon. But a lot to chew on there. Thank you guys so much for that. I, want to sort of come full circle, and the pandemic is obviously going to remain a part of our lives, hopefully for not too much longer, but for a part of this year, and at the least. So apart from of the specifics that we just talked about, how is the pandemic continuing to impact your agenda?
My personal agenda, or my agenda as president, ATA president, pretty much the same way as it has so far. Obviously, electronic board meetings. I've got 2 more left to go. 2 more board meetings before my term ends in Minneapolis, and I do hope it ends in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That I'm actually there. But we've got 2 board. We have a spring and a summer board meeting. It would be very nice if I could have, an in-person board meeting before I get out of office. I'm really hopeful that at least the summer board meeting might be in person, which means we can actually have a strategy day, which is, we've talked, an extra day we tack on normally in the winter. The one board meeting we just had, we tack on an extra day. It's more informal, and the board, it used to be called study day and strategy, but it's basically a board, we informal discussion of big items and longer term goals, and determine what those goals are. But I'd like to see an in-person meeting. Also waiting to find out what's going to happen with the FIT Congress. The FIT Congress was supposed to happen last December, and it got postponed until this coming December. And we'll have to wait and see, whether we can have a physical presence for that. And that may depend not only on the pandemic, but also on the political situation. Although I expect that to ease as well with that regard to travel to Cuba. And I think just in general, just continue to live with this continued uncertainty. Just things change from day to day. I'm here in New Orleans. We just went back to whatever it is, stage 2 or level 2, whatever go up. So basically 50% occupancy. We had been there, and then they tightened things up again because of a surge, and now we're loosening up. But I'm also looking at some increased numbers here, and I fully expect that the city might tighten back up again in another week or 2. So the only thing I know is I don't know anything for certain.
Yeah, it's still a very uncertain time on both sides of the Atlantic, I can tell you. Madalena, do you have anything to add there?
No, I mean, I think Ted really summed it up well, but I am looking ahead knowing that I will still be dealing with a lot of the effects of the pandemic when my term starts. And, from various perspectives, but especially financially for the association, we really need to take a hard look at that. And while we do have, some steady footing right now, it's like Ted said, we can't stay where we are like this forever. So that's something that I'll be thinking about.
Well, we'll all be pulling for you both, and Ted, as your term comes to an end, and Madalena, as you begin as president, and you got our support, and you got the support of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, and so I think we can keep this ship running. That's I'm an optimist, so that's what I'm going to say. We're going to just keep steaming ahead. Well, that wraps it up for me. And but I'd like to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we go, Ted?
No, I'm good, Matt. I just want to thank you for doing this, and congratulations on your 50th podcast milestone. Keep up the good work, and don't be afraid to toot your own horn.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Madalena?
Yeah, well, to piggyback onto what Ted said, thanks, Matt. And also just want to thank all of ATA's volunteers for stepping up, for keeping our program supported through your time, your commitment, for shifting with us as we've seen things shift over the past year. And personally, I want to thank Ted and the board, but especially Ted, for all the time and the sweat he's put into the association's work this past year. I'm sure that when you took over as president, Ted, this is not what you expected. So thank you for that. You've definitely taken it in stride, and your leadership has been admirable.
Thank you very much, Madalena. It's very kind of you. Yeah, no, who could have foreseen, a pandemic when I took over? I was looking forward to, traveling around, going to conferences, meeting people in our chapters. I wanted to go out and visit chapters and regional associations, and go with the flow.
Well, I can only second Madalena's words, and I'd like to thank you both so much for spending so much time with me today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
You've been listening to ATA President Ted Wozniak and ATA President-elect Madalena Sanchez-Sampaulo. Episode 52 was written and produced by me. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. Ben Carl is our announcer, and the music you heard today was produced by Ben Sound. Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. If you like today's podcast, please share it with a colleague or a friend. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you go. If you have any comments about today's podcast or past shows, or perhaps there's a topic you'd really like us to cover, please don't hesitate to write me. You can reach me at podcast@atanet.org. And if you're interested in joining ATA or want to know more about the association, be sure to check out our past episodes, follow ATA on social, or visit ATA's website, atanet.org. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.